Cedar Creek Medical in Savannah smells of antiseptic and floor wax, fluorescent lights buzzing over linoleum that squeaks under soft-soled shoes. Ashley Cooper moves through the ICU with mechanical precision, adjusting for drips and checking monitors while other nurses chatter about weekend plans at the coffee station. Her badge reads Ashley Cooper, RN, with no additional credentials listed, a detail that will matter more than she knows. The unit is organized chaos at 6:36 a.m., shift change overlapping with night crew that hasn't yet left, and Ashley moves between beds like she's cleared rooms before, because she has, though no one here knows that. She keeps a faded 1st Battalion 7th Marines patch sewn inside her jacket lining, touching it like a rosary when no one watches in the locker room, her fingers tracing the frayed edges as if the faded emblem might speak back to her. Her hands don't shake during codes when everyone else freezes. She has a slight limp favoring her left leg, barely noticeable unless you're looking, a gift from shrapnel in Anbar province that came close to ending things permanently. The scar tissue under her left sleeve runs from wrist to shoulder, pale and puckered, but she wears long sleeves year-round even in July when Savannah turns into an oven. Other nurses assume it's sensitivity to sun exposure or a bad burn from childhood. They don't ask. Nobody asks much of the quiet one. She's been at Cedar Creek for 14 months, picked the hospital with the precision of someone choosing a position, not randomly, but deliberately. The facility treats high-ranking military patients in its tertiary care unit, a specialty ward that draws flag officers and decorated veterans from Joint Base Lewis McChord and Naval Hospital Beaufort when cases exceed their capabilities. Pentagon brass. Protected patients. Classified assignments that technically don't exist on any official paperwork. Dr. Pierce arrives on rounds at 7:15 a.m. with an entourage of residents trailing like ducklings, his white coat pressed sharp as a knife edge, expensive watch catching light as he gestures at charts. He's been the medical director of the ICU for 6 years, Harvard-trained, board-certified in 3 subspecialties, and carries the casual arrogance of someone who has never been wrong about anything that mattered. His eyes land on Ashley like she's a stain on his pristine unit, tracking her as she finishes charting vital signs for the patient in Bay 4. He's seen her before, of course, but this morning something triggers him. Maybe it's the way the attending from overnight stopped her specifically to ask about the Swan-Ganz catheter placement, or maybe it's just that he's heard whispers about the nurse without the BSN somehow knowing more than the residents who cost their families $300,000 in tuition. You the one without the degree? Dr. Pierce calls across the unit, his voice carrying the particular timbre of someone accustomed to rooms going quiet when he speaks. Ashley finishes entering the last vital into the EHR, her fingers steady on the keyboard. She turns slowly. Her eyes are the color of granite, and when they meet his, something in his chest registers danger before his conscious mind catches up. She doesn't flinch. She doesn't apologize. Registered nurse, she says, voice level as a carpenter's level. That's the degree that matters here, doctor. She turns back to the monitor, dismissing him with the kind of casual disregard that makes his jaw tighten. One of the residents laughs, immediately catches himself, but it's too late. The sound hangs in the air like smoke. Pierce's hands curl into fists in his coat pockets. He's used to deference, to nurses rearranging their entire day because he asked a question, to administrators returning his calls in under 5 minutes. This woman, this RN without even a master's degree, just corrected him in front of his team. More than corrected him. Dismissed him. He forces a smile that doesn't reach his eyes and continues rounds, but his attention keeps circling back to her. Ashley Cooper works Bay 3 and Bay 4, moving between patients with the kind of efficiency that makes it look easy, that makes it look like she's simply been doing this forever and will continue doing it forever whether anyone notices or not. She charts at 8:02 a.m., checking glucose levels and input-output balances with the meticulous attention of someone for whom precision isn't a choice but a requirement. The residents watch her sometimes, asking quiet questions when Pierce isn't in earshot. "How did you know the swan was kinked?" one of them asks during a brief moment in the hallway. Ashley doesn't take credit. "The waveform told you," she says. "You just have to listen." By 8:45 a.m., Dr. Pierce has already begun a calculation running in the background of his mind, the kind of arithmetic that powerful people do when they've decided someone is a threat. She's popular with the patients. The attending from night shift specifically requested her. The residents respect her. And she has the kind of quiet confidence that suggests she isn't impressed by his credentials, his watch, his position, or his white coat. These are the things men like Pierce find intolerable. Not incompetence. Incompetence is manageable, something to lord over and correct. But earned respect, genuine competence, quiet authority that comes from somewhere other than a diploma or a title, that's a problem. That's something that needs to be addressed before it metastasizes. Ashley takes her break at 9:53 a.m. in the staff lounge on the 3rd floor, away from the main unit, away from watching eyes. She sits by the window overlooking the parking lot where a humid Georgia morning is already cooking asphalt into soft submission. She doesn't check her personal phone. There is no personal phone. She checks the encrypted device she keeps in her locker, a burner that receives messages from exactly one Pentagon liaison officer who handles her real assignment, the one that pays $3,400 per month in cash deposits to an account under a name that doesn't exist anywhere except on banking records. The message is brief, as they always are: no security anomalies at Cedar Creek. Monitor quarterly admission logs for classified patients. Continue employment. She deletes it. The device wipes itself clean. She sits in silence with a cup of black coffee that has gone lukewarm, her jacket draped over the chair beside her, and for just a moment her fingers find the inside lining where the patch is sewn. The faded embroidery of the 1st Battalion 7th Marines is barely visible now, threads worn thin from years of being touched, smoothed, held during moments when holding something steady was the only thing between composure and collapse. Her son wore that same patch. Charlie Company, 2nd Platoon. He deployed to Fallujah in March 2004 with a smile that suggested he believed in his own immortality, the way 18-year-olds do. He came back in a flag-draped box in October 2004 after a convoy ambush in the Jolan district, and Ashley attended the funeral in dress blue she hadn't worn in 3 years, standing ramrod straight while the rifle salute cracked across Arlington Cemetery, her hand steady but something inside her cracking with each shot. The patch is the only piece she kept besides the folded flag, which is now in a box under her apartment bed, something she touches maybe once a year when the date comes around. At 10:15 a.m., Ashley returns to the unit and finds a resident, Dr. Simmons, struggling with a difficult for placement on the patient in Bay 6. The woman is 72 with resistant veins and 3 prior failed sticks already marked in the chart. Dr. Simmons is on his 4th attempt, the patient growing quieter and more withdrawn with each miss, her arm swelling with small hematomas like a map of his learning curve. Ashley doesn't say anything. She simply appears beside the bed with a tourniquet already in her hands and makes eye contact with the woman. "May I?" The patient nods, relief flooding her face. Ashley finds the access on the first try, a vein that Dr. Simmons somehow missed despite standing directly over it, her needle gliding in with the kind of smooth certainty that makes it look like magic to the untrained eye. It's not magic. It's just 10,000 hours. It's just knowing what to feel for under the skin, what the vessels tell you if you listen. Dr. Simmons watches, and something in his expression shifts from embarrassment to curiosity. "How did you," he starts, but Pierce rounds the corner at that exact moment, taking in the scene, the failed resident, the successful nurse, the subtle hierarchy realigning itself in real time. The sound of his footsteps on the tile floor stops the conversation like a switch. "Everyone chart?" he asks, his voice neutral in the way that means it absolutely is not. "Yes, sir," Dr. Simmons says quickly, turning back to his other patients. Ashley is already moving, already transitioning to Bay 7 where a patient needs their morning assessment completed. She doesn't look at Pierce. She doesn't need to. She can feel the weight of his attention, heavy as a hand on her shoulder, and she recognizes it immediately. It's the attention of someone who has decided you're a problem. That's when everything changes, though Ashley doesn't know it yet. Pierce excuses himself from rounds and walks directly to the administrative offices on the 2nd floor, and by 11:06 a.m. he's already begun making calls. Small calls. Casual calls. The kind that won't leave obvious traces but will begin, incrementally, to poison the water. He calls surgical services and mentions, just in passing, that he's concerned about nursing standards on the ICU. He mentions, to the chief nursing officer during their afternoon meeting, that it might be worth reviewing credential verification across the unit, that not everyone came with the appropriate oversight. Nothing specific. Nothing that could be quoted back to him. Just seeds, planted in soil he's been cultivating for years, in relationships built on golf outings and departmental politics that Ashley never bothered to participate in. She's not the type to make allies of convenience. She's not the type to attend hospital fundraisers or smile appropriately at Christmas parties. She does her work and she does it perfectly, and that perfection, that competence, that quiet refusal to need validation from anyone, these things are about to become very expensive. The room at Cedar Creek Medical was drowning in afternoon light when Dr. Pierce walked in, his white coat pressed sharp enough to cut. General Harland lay propped against 3 pillows, his daughter perched on the visitor's chair with a magazine folded in her lap. Ashley was adjusting the 4-drip when Pierce stopped at the foot of the bed, chart in hand, his eyes scanning the documentation with exaggerated concentration. "Miss Cooper." His voice carried the weight of someone announcing a verdict. "Did you document this medication administration correctly? Because it looks like you can't follow basic protocols." Ashley's hand steadied on the 4 line. She turned to face him, her expression carved from something harder than stone. "It's documented per hospital standard, doctor." Pierce turned to the daughter as though Ashley had just confirmed his darkest suspicions. His voice dropped to that particular register reserved for concerned professionals, concerned, sympathetic, deadly. "We're dealing with staffing challenges here at Cedar Creek. Nurses without proper education sometimes struggle with complex cases like your father's. It's nobody's fault, really. The system just isn't always equipped to handle. Your insecurity is showing, doctor." Ashley's words came out flat, measured, a weapon sheathed in ice. "You might want to get that checked." She turned with mechanical precision, each movement controlled like a soldier executing a drill, and walked from the room without waiting for a response. Her boots made no sound on the linoleum, her back ramrod straight, every fiber of her body compressed into a stillness that was somehow more terrifying than rage. The daughter watched her leave, then looked at her father, confusion flickering across her face. Pierce smiled. He should have been furious. Instead he looked like someone who had just found exactly what he was hunting for. What happened next didn't just silence the room, it began the systematic dismantling of a career that no one knew existed. By the next morning, Pierce had already begun his work. He cornered the surgical staff in the scrub room before the first procedures of the day, his voice low and urgent, the tone of a colleague sharing critical information. "I need to flag something. Nurse Cooper contaminated a sterile field during pre-op yesterday. Minor incident, we caught it in time, but I wanted the team to be aware. We have protocols for a reason." He let that hang in the air like poison gas, then added, "I've also noticed some irregularities with medication counts on her shifts. Probably just charting errors, but you know how administration is about these things." The seed took root with terrifying speed. By lunch, the story had metastasized through the unit, contaminated steriles, missing meds, a nurse who couldn't be trusted with the basics. Nobody questioned whether he'd filed incident reports. Nobody asked for specifics. The narrative was too convenient, too aligned with what they already suspected about someone who didn't attend the Christmas parties, who didn't laugh at the attending physician's jokes, who somehow managed to do her job better than people with master's degrees. Ashley sat down in the break room the next day with a turkey sandwich and a yogurt. She had been there for exactly 43 seconds when the exodus began. The 3 nurses at the far table stood simultaneously, their conversation stopping mid-sentence like a radio station going dead. They gathered their lunch containers without looking at her, without speaking, and filed out with the coordinated silence of a military withdrawal. The refrigerator hummed in the corner. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, a sound like insects trapped in plastic. Ashley stared at the wall in front of her, her sandwich untouched, her yogurt growing warm, her face the color of weathered concrete. She didn't flinch. She didn't blink. She didn't cry. She ate every bite anyway, because wasting food was weakness, and weakness was the one thing she couldn't afford. When she was finished, she rinsed her containers, dried them with paper towel, and returned to her patients. The silence of the break room followed her like a ghost that only she could see. 2 days later, the formal write-up appeared on the unit board in the hallway outside the nurses' station. Everyone passed it during shift change. It was positioned there deliberately, centered on the cork board where the schedule and birthday notices were posted. The paper was white, the margin notes precise, the text typed in official font. But someone had taken a red marker and written across the top, "Persistent unprofessional conduct, A. Cooper." The letters were large enough to read from 10 feet away. Large enough that every resident passing through, every family member, every staff member would see it. Ashley stopped in front of the board at 1,400 hours when she came on shift. Her eyes moved across the document once, top to bottom, as though she were reading a weather report. Her jaw tightened imperceptibly, just the smallest compression, like a vice being turned 1/4 turn. Then she continued down the hallway to the patient floor without a word. Pierce walked past the board 40 minutes later with a resident trailing behind him. He paused deliberately, raised his voice just enough to be audible. Some people just aren't cut out for real medicine. You'll see this throughout your career, good intentions, but without the proper foundation, mistakes compound. He tapped the red marker name with his index finger. This is what happens when you hire based on availability instead of credentials. The resident nodded, absorbing the lesson. Ashley, 2 rooms away, continued charting vital signs with hands that didn't shake and a breathing pattern that never wavered. Her fingers moved across the keyboard with the same mechanical precision she'd learned clearing rooms in Baghdad when she was Captain Cooper instead of just a nurse, when people called her Phantom 6 and meant it as a compliment instead of a whisper. What Pierce couldn't see was the patch sewn into the lining of her jacket, faded now, the thread old, the fabric worn from 14 years of carrying a weight nobody understood. A 1st Battalion 7th Marines patch. The same one her son had worn the day his convoy was ambushed in Fallujah, the same day that unit lost 6 soldiers and somehow stayed together because their commanding officer, a Marine general named Harland, had held a position that no one thought could be held. A man who right now lay in room for 12 watching the clock like a prisoner watching a calendar. A man she couldn't save without destroying everything she'd spent years building. The next shift brought worse. Pierce had filed 3 separate complaints with the nursing director, each meticulously documented, each citing specific, if carefully selected, examples of unprofessional conduct. He had submitted a memo to hospital legal questioning her credentials, cease it to administration with the subject line, Scope of Practice Compliance Review. He had invoked a formal policy review board. The bureaucratic machinery was now running, and it didn't care about the truth. It only cared about the paper trail. Ashley worked through it all with the composure of someone who had survived worse. Who had survived much, much worse. But that wasn't the worst part, and somewhere deep in the silence she carried, she knew it. The worst part was that General Harland was running out of time, and she was running out of options, and the 2 truths were about to collide in a way that would change everything. The shift started at 11 p.m., and Ashley knew something was wrong the moment she checked the general's monitor. The numbers didn't lie. Never did. His oxygen saturation sat at 91% and dropping like a stone down a well, the kind of descent that meant minutes, not hours. She read the waveform the way she'd once read enemy movement, each dip a warning, each spike a signal. Tracheal deviation. Asymmetrical chest wall. The signs lined up like ammunition in a magazine, each one pointing toward the same catastrophe, tension pneumothorax. Collapsed lung. Air pressing into the space between his ribs like an invisible fist squeezing his heart. The other nurses on night shift were scattered across the unit, one updating charts at the station, another answering a call light in for 12. Ashley pulled the curtain around the general's bed with mechanical precision, the metal ring sliding along the rail with a sound like distant gunfire. She'd learned not to show urgency. Urgency panicked people. Urgency made mistakes bloom. Her hands moved with the terrible quiet efficiency of someone who'd performed field triage in the Anbar desert, where panic was a luxury that got people killed. "General, I need you to stay very still," she said, her voice the color of stone. "Your lung is collapsing. I'm going to fix it." His eyes went wide, not with fear but with the recognition of someone who understood combat medicine when he heard it. "Do it," he said. "No questions. No doubt." Just a Marine giving an order that was also a plea. The supplies were in her pocket already. 14-gauge angiocath needle. Alcohol swab. She'd kept them there for 3 weeks, ever since she'd reviewed his classified file and seen the notation about his service-related thoracic injury, the old scar tissue that made him vulnerable to exactly this kind of cascade. Most nurses didn't carry field equipment. Ashley wasn't most nurses. The needle gleamed under the fluorescent lights like a small silver promise. She found the landmark with her fingertips, second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line, and her hands didn't hesitate. The alcohol swab burned away the smell of the day, the coffee and the fluorescent cleaning solution and the industrial sweat that clung to everyone who worked these halls. She felt his breath catch. She felt the moment his brain registered what was happening, not as a nurse performing a procedure but as a warrior recognizing another warrior's decision to save his life. The needle went in. 2 inches of penetration, pushing through skin and fascia and muscle memory itself. And then, the sound. The hiss of air escaping. Pressure releasing from a lung that had been slowly strangling itself. It was the most beautiful sound in the world, better than applause, better than orders from command. It was the sound of survival. "Oxygen saturation?" she asked, her voice steady as a rifle sight. 94, the monitoring nurse called out, the one who'd appeared from nowhere the moment the general's alarm had spiked. 96. Climbing. 102 now. Sinus rhythm. Steady. The general's breathing eased, the tension leaving his shoulders like a wave receding from shore. His eyes found Ashley's and held them for exactly 3 seconds, long enough to communicate something that existed beyond words. Long enough to confirm what they both already knew: she had just saved his life using skills that no bedside nurse was supposed to possess. Skills that belonged to operating theaters and trauma bays and forward surgical teams in places the world preferred to forget existed. She removed the needle with the same precision she'd inserted it, applied the dressing, documented the procedure with clinical detachment. Already her mind was calculating the consequences. Already she was running through the fallout matrix like a computer processing binary code. The general's condition had stabilized. That was the only metric that mattered. Everything else was arithmetic she'd learned to do in her sleep. Dr. Pierce arrived 7 minutes later, moving with the languid confidence of a man who'd never encountered a problem he couldn't outmaneuver with paperwork and institutional leverage. His eye swept across the monitor readout, the dressing on the general's chest, Ashley's face, and she watched something shift behind his pupils. Not concern. Recognition. Recognition that she had just performed an emergency procedure without his authorization, without a doctor's order, without permission from the hierarchy he'd spent his entire career constructing like a fortress around himself. What happened here? His voice came out smooth as oil on troubled water. Tension pneumothorax, Ashley said, her tone the color of concrete. Needle decompression at the second intercostal space. Oxygen saturation recovered from 91 to 102. Vitals stable. He didn't move. Just stood there, watching her the way a wolf watches prey that's already been cornered. You performed an invasive procedure. The patient would have arrested in 4 minutes. That's not your call to make, Cooper. He turned to the monitoring nurse. Document that I was never called. Document that this nurse performed an unauthorized procedure outside her scope of practice. He looked back at Ashley with eyes the color of winter sky. You're done here. Go find another bed. She didn't argue. Arguing meant emotion. Emotion meant weakness. She simply nodded once, her face an absolute void, and began transferring her notes to the other nurse with the methodical precision of someone clocking out of a shift that had already ended long ago. The general's hand reached out, just slightly, a micro-movement that only someone trained in observation would catch. She gave him the barest nod in return. Understood. Mission continues. She wasn't abandoning him. She was just changing positions. By 2 a.m., The incident report had arrived in her inbox, forwarded through 3 hospital departments like a virus replicating through tissue. The language was precise, surgical, devastating. Unauthorized invasive procedure performed by RN Ashley Cooper without physician order or verbal authorization. Violation of scope of practice limitations. Patient safety protocols compromised. Insubordination and reckless endangerment. Each phrase a brick in a wall constructed specifically to suffocate her career from the inside. Pierce had copies to administration within 90 minutes. He'd flagged it for the credentialing committee, the nursing director, and hospital legal, a paper trail that moved like a military operation, coordinated and relentless. She'd seen this before, in different uniforms, under different flags. The machinery of institutional destruction grinding forward with terrifying efficiency. One well-placed report could trigger investigations that would take months to resolve. One well-placed report could end her placement here, compromise the mission, leave the general vulnerable to whatever security threat had triggered her Pentagon assignment in the first place. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that Dr. Pierce had no idea what he'd just done. He'd documented proof that Ashley Cooper possessed medical knowledge far exceeding her credentials. He'd created an official record of her performing emergency procedures that required either military training or trauma experience that no civilian nurse should have acquired. He'd inadvertently begun assembling the very evidence that would eventually expose her. The night stretched on like black water. Ashley sat in the break room at 4:30 in the morning, holding a cup of coffee that had gone cold somewhere between 2 a.m. and now, and understood with the crystalline clarity of someone trained to calculate probabilities that everything was about to accelerate. The general was running out of time. The mission was running out of runway. And Dr. Pierce, in his desperation to destroy her, had just set a collision course between all 3 that would need exactly one more catalyst to detonate. She touched the patch sewn inside her jacket lining, the faded 1st Battalion 7th Marines insignia that matched the one General Harland had worn 30 years ago when he'd commanded her son's unit in Fallujah. Just fabric. Just thread. But it meant the same thing it had always meant: some obligations transcended uniform changes. Some missions never really ended. They just evolved into new forms, waiting in hospital corridors, disguised in scrubs and bad fluorescent lighting. The paper trail Dr. Pierce constructed was a masterwork of institutional malice. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He documented. Each form bore timestamps and careful language, observed deviation from established protocols, unauthorized administration of emergency interventions, scope of practice violation documented at 2,147 hours. He collected them like evidence, each sheet a brick in a wall built to suffocate rather than strike. The surgical staff confirmed her contamination of the sterile field. The pharmacy director noted inconsistencies in medication counts. He'd planted those himself, sliding numbers on spreadsheets with surgical precision. He CC'd department heads. He filed copies in triplicate. He was building something bureaucratic and airtight, a paper fortress no lawyer could breach because every word was technically true, just arranged to mean something it didn't. Then came the Policy Review Board. Dr. Pierce invoked it himself, requesting an emergency convening. He walked into the administrator's office with a leather portfolio, each document tabbed and color-coded. "I have concerns about patient safety," he said, his voice steady as a scalpel. "This nurse has repeatedly exceeded her scope of practice. I documented each incident. I have witnesses." The administrator, a soft man named Richardson who'd spent 23 years avoiding confrontation, nodded slowly while reading. By the time Pierce finished, the decision was essentially made. The board would meet. Procedures would be followed. But the outcome was already written. The first complaint landed on the nursing director's desk at 0830 on a Thursday. The second arrived that afternoon. The third by end of business Friday. 3 separate grievances, each citing different violations, each meticulous and damning. Dr. Pierce had CC'd hospital legal on all of them. Legal was a defensive animal. They would recommend caution, suspension pending investigation, administrative leave without pay. Pierce had weaponized the system itself, turning the hospital's own compliance machinery into an instrument of her erasure. What made it brilliant was that he never had to prove anything definitively. He only had to raise enough questions that caution demanded her removal from patient care. The burden of proof would fall on her. The memo to hospital legal arrived at 10:15 a.m. Dr. Pierce's signature was precise, his language careful. I question the credentials of nursing staff member Ashley Cooper. Her advanced medical intervention suggests training beyond what her employment file indicates. The scope of practice violations are documented. However, I recommend legal review whether her educational background has been properly verified. Background checks may require updating. It was a thin suggestion, a barely whispered accusation, but it was enough. Legal would flag her file. They would request transcripts. They would find nothing wrong because there was nothing to find, but the delay, the investigation, the administrative machinery grinding forward, that was the point. The machinery didn't care about truth. It only cared about liability. And right now, she was a liability. The notice came by email. Administrative leave, effective immediately, pending investigation into scope of practice violations. Full pay suspended. Badge access revoked. She was not to return to Cedar Creek Medical pending resolution of the grievance process. The tone was neutral, bureaucratic, the kind of language that made cruelty seem like procedure. Ashley read it once. Read it again. She didn't call anyone. She didn't argue. She understood what had happened with the clarity of someone who'd watched power operate in combat zones. This was Dr. Pierce's final move before the endgame. He'd isolated her. Cut her off from the general. Removed her ability to monitor the Iraqi national. Mission status, compromised. Patient status, vulnerable. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that she couldn't defend herself. Captain Ashley Cooper couldn't walk into administration and say, I have advanced military medical training because I'm a classified Pentagon intelligence asset. She couldn't invoke classified authority. She couldn't tell them about the mission. She couldn't even say the words without triggering the exact operational security breach her handlers had drilled her against for 18 years. So she sat in her apartment in Savannah, watching her phone, monitoring General Harlan's chart through a secure terminal, helpless. The investigation would take weeks. By then, Dr. Pierce's incompetent medication protocols would have the general's sepsis markers climbing. She knew what was coming. She'd seen the vitals. She'd read Pierce's orders. The man was being killed by committee and documentation. The basement laundry room smelled of bleach and industrial fabric softener, the kind of chemical combination that burned the back of the throat and stuck in hair for hours. Ashley descended the concrete stairs at 0600 when the laundry attendant was on his first break and the machines hummed their mechanical rhythm against the basement walls. She carried her scrubs folded once, ready to return them. All of them. 23 years of service across 9 different hospitals and 14 classified assignments, and it ended in a basement surrounded by the smell of institutional detergent that never quite washed clean. She set the stack on the counter. One piece at a time, she unfolded them and began again, creasing each item with parade ground precision. The pants first, fold the legs, align the seams, crease sharp enough to cut. The cotton was still warm from the dryer. She smoothed her hand across the fabric, feeling the warmth, the slight dampness still lingering. The top next, arms folded first, then lengthwise, the hospital logo perfectly centered on the front, crisp and exact. She creased it harder than necessary, as if precision could make this moment mean something different. As if the perfect fold could change the outcome. Her fingers traced the jacket hem. Inside, stitched along the lining in thread that matched the fabric perfectly, was the faded unit patch. 1st Battalion 7th Marines. Bravo Company. The patch had been there for 17 years, a violation of uniform regulations, a secret kept against every code and every protocol. She'd sewn it there the morning after her final combat deployment in Baghdad, when her hands had still shaken too much to hold a coffee cup. The patch was supposed to be buried with her or burned when she died. Certainly never discovered in a hospital break room or a basement laundry facility by someone who might ask questions about why a civilian nurse was carrying Marine Corps colors. She touched it now, felt the stitches under her fingertips. The thread was still strong. The patch still held the correct crimp, the way it settled after 18 years of being carried in a jacket worn through the worst days and the best ones, the ordinary ones and the ones where everything changed. The general had worn a matching patch 30 years ago. His son had worn one in Fallujah when Ashley's unit had provided support for his convoy. That was the connection they'd never spoken about, the shared language that existed underneath everything, the reason she'd fought so hard for him these past weeks while pretending it was just competent nursing care. She folded the jacket last, creasing the sleeves with mechanical precision. When it was done, all 3 pieces were stacked in perfect alignment, the hospital logo visible on all of them, the stack geometric and exact. She placed her hospital ID on top, badge clipped in the corner, the magnetic strip worn from months of swiping through secured doors. Everything was prepared for return. Everything was documented and complete. The laundry attendant, an older man named Carlos who'd worked Cedar Creek Medical for 31 years, watched silently from across the room. He didn't say anything. He'd watched enough shifts end, enough people walk away from hospitals with that particular way of holding their shoulders. He knew the difference between tired and broken. Ashley was neither. She was something else entirely. She looked like someone who'd made a decision and was executing it without hesitation, the way certain people moved through difficult things, not with pain, but with purpose. Ashley turned to walk out. The basement fluorescent lights hummed their indifferent song overhead, the sound that was always the same in hospitals no matter which city, which state, which assignment. Bleach and detergent and the mechanical breath of industrial machines. The stairs took her up toward the main level, toward the lobby, toward the exit. She didn't look back. She didn't pause. The door opened onto Savannah morning light, the air warm and heavy with humidity that would grow worse as the day progressed. By evening it would feel like breathing through cloth. She had 17 hours before the Iraqi national arrived at Cedar Creek Medical. 17 hours before her presence and her patch and every classified detail of her existence might be exposed to federal scrutiny and hospital administration and the full bureaucratic apparatus that would follow. By then, General Harland would be in acute decline. His sepsis markers would be climbing. His oxygen saturation would be dropping. Dr. Pierce's protocol would have him coded by midnight. Mission failure. Patient death. Cover blown for nothing. Ashley sat in her apartment with the classified terminal, watching vitals climb, watching time count down, and made her choice. She would return to Cedar Creek Medical that night. She would use her security clearance to bypass the badge restrictions. She would enter the general's room knowing she was walking into her own destruction, her cover, her career, and any future in intelligence operations. And she would save his life. Some missions, she'd learned, didn't end when administration said they did. Some missions just changed uniforms. Tuesday afternoon at Cedar Creek Medical was like every other Tuesday, fluorescent lights buzzing their endless drone, the smell of antiseptic cutting through the Savannah heat that pressed against the windows. The lobby doors slid open at exactly 1,400 hours, and 2 federal agents escorted an Iraqi national through the atrium, his paperwork stamped for asylum-related medical treatment. Nobody in the hallway paid attention. Just another transfer, another chart, another face that would occupy a bed for a few days before moving to the next facility. Nobody knew this man was about to change everything. Ashley was checking medication inventory outside the break room when the Iraqi national turned the corner toward the patient wing. Their eyes met for exactly 2 seconds. His face drained of color like someone had pulled a plug. He stopped walking. The federal agent stopped with him. And then he whispered something that made his voice disappear entirely, Phantom 6, the words coming out like a prayer or a curse or both at once, like he'd just seen a ghost walk through a hospital wall wearing scrubs. Ashley kept moving. Her hands didn't shake. Her breathing didn't change. But every nerve ending in her body went rigid for exactly 1 second before muscle memory took over and she continued down the hallway as if she hadn't heard anything at all. She had. She knew exactly what that name meant. She knew exactly who was wearing it now, and she knew that name was supposed to stay buried in classified files somewhere in the Pentagon basement, not whispered in a Savannah hospital corridor at 2 in the afternoon. General Harland was sitting up when the Iraqi National's escort agents walked past his room. The general had ears like a hawk and the instincts of someone who'd commanded troops through urban warfare in Fallujah. He caught the whisper. He caught the way the man's hands trembled. He caught the direction of the man's stare. And he caught the name that hung in the air like smoke from a rifle shot. 10 minutes later, General Harland pressed the call button and demanded Ashley's personnel file with the tone of a man who'd spent 30 years issuing orders that got obeyed. The file appeared within the hour. There were advantages to being a high-ranking patient with Pentagon connections. The general sat back against his pillows, oxygen cannula running under his nose, and started reading aloud to his daughter who'd been visiting since dawn. Navy Cross for Valor under fire. He paused. His daughter leaned forward. That's the third highest combat decoration, honey. Not many get these. He turned the page. Bronze Star with V device. That means combat valor, not just, his voice caught slightly. Not just service. These are warrior decorations. Another page. 2 purple hearts. 2 separate combat wounds. His hands began to tremble as he held the file. This woman saved my life, and I had no idea she was. The door burst open. Dr. Pierce stood in the threshold with his mask of clinical superiority still firmly in place, that smile that looked like a shark showing its teeth before the strike. He was already talking before he fully entered the room, his voice dripping with that particular venom he reserved for moments when he thought he'd won something. General, security is just removing your former nurse from the premises. Protocols and all that. She was accessing files above her. Doctor. General Harland's voice cut through the room like a command to cease fire. Not loud. Just authoritative in a way that made the air pressure change. You will stand there and you will be silent. Pierce froze. Nobody spoke to him that way. Not here. Not at Cedar Creek Medical, where his family had donated a new cardiology wing and his reputation was ironclad. The general continued reading, and his voice grew stronger with each line he spoke. Silver Star. 2 separate instances of leadership under enemy contact. His eyes were bright now, wet at the edges, but his voice steady as a surgeon's hand. Combat Action Ribbon. Meritorious Unit Commendation. He looked up at Pierce with the flat stare of someone who'd sent men into combat and lived with the consequences. And then here at the bottom, in the classified section, I had to call my liaison to access service commendation from JSOC for intelligence gathering in Baghdad. Intelligence gathering, doctor. While supposedly just being a nurse. Pierce's face had gone pale. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. General Harland set the file down on his bedside table and slowly, despite the fall line in his arm and the oxygen cannula under his nose, despite the fact that his lung had collapsed less than 48 hours ago, he swung his legs out of bed and stood. The hospital gown flapped open in the back. He didn't care. He looked at his daughter. Sweetheart, step into the hallway for just a moment. She did, without question, the way children of military families learn to obey those particular tones. When the door closed, General Harland turned to face Ashley Cooper directly. His spine was ramrod straight. His hand came up to his forehead in the sharpest salute Ashley had seen outside Arlington Cemetery, fingers extended, arm at exactly 90 degrees, the kind of salute that meant absolute respect from one warrior to another. His voice broke as he spoke, cracking across the words like a man fighting to keep his composure. Captain Cooper saved my son's entire company when their convoy was ambushed outside Fallujah. She held that position for 9 hours. 9 hours against 3 different attack waves while waiting for QRF. My boy came home because of her. Because of you. Pierce made a sound like air escaping from a punctured tire. He reached for the doorframe to steady himself. The general didn't even look at him. That afternoon, the FBI arrived with a warrant that felt like a thunderstorm condensed into a single piece of paper. 2 agents escorted Dr. Pierce to a conference room on the administrative floor and closed the door. They asked him about the Iraqi patient's treatment assignment. Pierce assumed it was routine. Protocol. Standard security questions for anyone entering a facility with classified government contracts. Then one agent opened a laptop. Dr. Pierce, you accessed Ashley Cooper's personnel files 17 times in the past month. Personnel files well above your authorization level. Would you like to explain that? Pierce stammered. Quality assurance. Hospital policy. Making sure protocols were followed. The agent turned the screen toward him. Timestamped screenshots. Pierce's credentials accessing sealed records. And there, spreadsheets showing attempted modifications. Disciplinary notes added to her file that had never existed. Her credential verification altered and re-altered. His digital fingerprints all over the fraud like he'd signed it in blood. You were attempting to manufacture evidence of credential fraud, the agent said quietly. In a facility with active Pentagon intelligence operations. You were trying to discredit a decorated Marine Corps captain on active assignment without even knowing who you were attacking. The second agent produced her phone and dialed. Sir, yes. We have Dr. Pierce in interview. No, he's not cooperating. Yes, we found everything you flagged. His access attempts, the document modifications, all of it. We're proceeding with arrest. Pierce's voice rose to a pitch that sounded like breaking glass. I'm a physician. I was protecting patient safety from an unqualified. From a captain in the Marine Corps with more combat medical training than you've had continuing education credits, the agent interrupted. From someone who held a tactical position while your fancy degree was still gathering dust in your parents' house. Keep talking, doctor. You're only making the charges worse. The perp walk happened at shift change. Maximum visibility. 2 federal agents escorted Dr. Pierce through Cedar Creek Medical in handcuffs, actual steel handcuffs that clicked against his wrists with a sound like a cell door closing forever. They walked past the break room where he'd held court, where nurses had listened to him mock Ashley's credentials and her background and her very right to exist in his hospital. The nurses who'd believed him stood frozen, watching. They walked past the unit board where his own suspension notice now hung in bright red marker for everyone to see. His name. His offense. His fall from grace documented in the same permanent ink he'd used to try destroying hers. His face was blotchy red, veins bulging at his temples, his mouth working soundlessly like a fish cast up on dry sand, struggling for air that had suddenly become scarce. The door slid open and he was gone, and Cedar Creek Medical collectively exhaled like a room full of people who'd been holding their breath without knowing it. 18 months later, after criminal charges and plea deals and professional board hearings, Dr. Pierce taught CPR at Coastal Community College in a strip mall classroom for $13 an hour. His medical license suspended. His career transformed into a neon-lit afterlife where his advanced degrees meant nothing and his name meant less. Students arrived, learned chest compressions from a man they'd never remember, and left. Ashley finished her shift that evening. The Iraqi national's file had been flagged by her Pentagon liaison. The man was a former interpreter whose intelligence had dismantled a medical supply smuggling ring using Cedar Creek to move contraband overseas. Her cover was now blown. Her assignment complete. Her next posting would be Camp Lejeune, a training position that would use her skills without asking her to hide again. But first she had hours left on the clock. General Harland was sitting up when she entered his room, color returning to his face like a man coming back from the edge. His daughter was there, and when she saw Ashley, tears spilled down her face. You saved his life. I know that now. I didn't know before, but I know it now. Ashley nodded, accepting the gratitude the way she accepted everything, with quiet composure, no bitterness, no triumph, just the professionalism of someone doing what needed doing. She adjusted the general's for, checked his vitals, confirmed that the corrected medication protocol was doing its work. His blood pressure stable. His oxygen saturation climbing. his heart rhythm returning to the steady percussion of a man who'd get to see another year. When she turned to leave, the general stopped her with a single word. "Captain." She paused at the door, her back straight, the light catching the edge of her shoulder where the faded 1st Battalion 7th Marines patch was sewn inside her jacket lining, a patch that matched the one her son had worn, that matched the one she'd kept hidden for 9 years, waiting for the right moment to return it. She removed it carefully, the fabric soft from age, and placed it on his bedside table. "He'd want you to have this," she said quietly. "Captain, why nursing? Why this?" The general's voice was hoarse. Ashley stood for a moment in the doorway, and something softer moved across her face, not warmth exactly, but something close to it. "The ones who have seen the worst often give the most, sir. It's the only way some of us find our way home." She walked out of Cedar Creek Medical for the last time, past the fluorescent lights and their endless drone, past the antiseptic smell that would never quite wash away from her skin, past the break room where she'd been exiled and the laundry room where she'd folded her surrender. The Savannah sunlight hit her face as she pushed through the automatic doors, and a black sedan was waiting, always waiting, to take her to the next assignment, the next uniform, the next war that nobody would ever know about. The patch remained on General Harlan's bedside table, faded fabric holding stories that would never fully be told, a reminder that some warriors never stop serving. They just change uniforms. If you're settling in for a good story, you're in the right place. Hit like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments what time of day it is where you are. Let's get back to it.